Traveling into the Elven Kingdom was similar to what traveling through the kingdom was like. Han thought it was interesting they were easily able to cross the border without anyone approaching them and asking what their business was. When Han asked if they were within the Elven Kingdom to Ellis, her response was, "Based on how long we have traveled, it is very likely we are in my mother's kingdom." For going into another territory, Han felt the experience was slightly anticlimactic. "What is wrong with the trees?" Han asked, as he noticed that many of the trees looked to be dying. Looking at the trees, Ellie responded, "We are approaching the sinking swamp. The water is poisonous to trees, so the border to the swamp is clearly marked." "If the water is poisonous, are we going to be able to wade through it?" he asked. "The water is not poisonous to humanoids. From what I've been told, the taste is very salty, so I do not recommend you drink from it," she explained. Han understood that the swamp water was brackish, a mixture of fresh water and salt water. This would explain why the trees around here were dead or dying, cause they were meant to survive off of fresh water. "Stop the wagon!" Ellie screamed out at the wagon in the front, being driven by one of the adventurers. Aside from his carriage, all of the wagons came to a sudden stop with the horses neighing in annoyance and fright. The princess's message was passed to everyone, and many of the adventurers were discussing why Ellie had suddenly yelled out. Han suspected the reason why, but waited for her to clarify. "Up ahead, the land is not actually land, but the beginning of the swamp. The dirt floats on top of vegetation, which then floats on top of the water. If the wagon had continued for even a couple of feet more, we would have lost the horse and the wagon," Ellie quietly explained to the two of them. "Floating ground?" Celestia whispered, frightened by the thought of such a sneaky environment. "You'll be safe," Han assured her, trying to alleviate her fears. If Han didn't have his ability, he knew that he would be anxious about entering such a swamp. Remembering the swamps on Earth, Han wondered what type of creatures lived inside this place. When Ellie went off to divide the gear among the party members, Han looked back at his companions and said, "Make sure to watch out for creatures swimming in the water." "We will be vigilant, Master," Horacia said to him. For the Jungle Sisters, this place would be close to the environment they were designed for. Seeing how close together the trees were, Horacia would be able to easily navigate between them. "You will be in charge of creating a way for us to navigate through the swamp," Han commanded Horacia. "Anaklis, I want you to scout around in the water, and make sure that no creatures come close to us," he ordered. Both of them nodded, aware of how dangerous the environment was. When all the supplies were divided between Ellie's servant and the guards, along with the adventurers, they proceeded into the swamp. Each of them waded into the swamp looking miserable about the experience. Horacia launched herself towards the nearest tree, leaving behind the sturdy length of her web. With the precision of her species, Horacia moved back and forth, forming the beginning of the bridge. Approaching the bridge, Han stepped onto it and was surprised that it wasn't sticky like he thought it would be. Even though it wasn't sticky, there was a distinct feeling of his shoes gripping the bridge. It kind of felt like he was in the tub and the grips people place on the bottom to prevent people from slipping. Behind him, Celestia, Brittany, and Queen followed, with Anaklis wading into the swamp. It was mesmerizing watching Anaklis swimming through the swamp. In her hands, she carried her deadly bow, while there was a spear on her back. As Horacia was creating the bridge, she was looking out for any dangers in the water. Han noticed everyone watching as his group crossed above the water, and not needing to become soaked. He had offered Ellie to utilize this method, but she found the idea of using the web as a bridge to be creepy. She was already ready to wade through the swamp, so wasn't bothered by it. He did enjoy watching Frank having to wade through the swamp and getting dirty. A part of him still held a grudge against Frank for calling Celestia a slut. Though he wouldn't actively screw with him, Han didn't intend to go out of his way to help him either. Progressing through the swamp was a slow and arduous task. Due to the opacity of the water, they had to make sure that they didn't trip over anything. Occasionally, one of the members would suddenly sink into the water. This was caused by the uneven ground, which would often lead to a drop. Han watched as Anaklis pulled on her drawstring and shot an arrow into the water. The water would then erupt with tentacles, and after a few more arrows were fired into it, the creature floated to the surface. From where he was, the creature looked like something out of an H.P. Lovecraft novel. Those wading through the water would pale each time Anaklis slew one of those creatures. Han imagined that it wouldn't be as enjoyable of an experience as hentai videos would have you imagine. As it became darker, there was a heavy mist that appeared above the water. Due to how thick the fog was, they were unable to proceed any further. There were occasional hills that went over the water's surface, so when Ellie saw the fog start to roll in, she looked for one of those islands. With how large the islands were, they couldn't set up tents and had to rely on a type of coat that was created for traveling through the sinking swamp. It was like a poncho that kept in body heat, creating a personal tent. The guards and adventurers kept turns with the watch to make sure none of those freakish scary octopuses didn't crawl onto the tiny island. For Han and his group, Horacia created a structure that would help them lay on. Han made some heavy blankets appear to create a makeshift bed. There were tons of pillows that were created for them to relax on. Anaklis climbed up the trees and joined them in their love nest. In the middle of the night, there were screams from the guards. Jerking awake, he tried to figure out what was happening. Anaklis placed a hand on top of his to signal that everyone was okay. "What is happening?" he asked her once he was fully awake. Being woken up suddenly was not something that he was used to, and always took him a moment to adjust to the situation. Two types of monsters are attacking the island: the strange tentacle monsters and giant bat monsters. It seems like the night is when both of them become active, she explained to him. As she was talking, Anaklis was firing her poison-tipped arrows at monsters that got close to them. When it looked like the guards were unable to handle a monster, she would fire a shot at the nearby creature. Horacia was guarding them for any that snuck past her sister. Once in a while, Horacia would throw a kunai and then rush towards her target. When Celestial was up to speed, she looked at the various monsters and shouted, "As the one that controls you, I command you to rain down upon my enemies. Hellfire rain!" Around the island, there were small fireballs that rained down on top of the creatures. Many of the bat and tentacle creatures flailed around on fire. The ones that weren't on the island or in the trees quickly dove into the water. Wanting to contribute to the fight, Han thought that the best weapon in this environment would take advantage of the salinity of the water. "Get away from the water!" he shouted to the people on the island, causing a couple of them to jump away from it, not knowing why. Pointing a finger towards the water, he sent out a large bolt of lightning. A blinding light caused everyone to quickly turn away, and a crackling could be heard. The mist became even thicker as the lightning instantly evaporated the top layer of the water. As people were blinking their eyes to regain their eyesight and their night vision, people slowly saw lumps floating towards the surface. Even though Han didn't kill all the monsters, the remainder quickly fled away from the area. Even if monsters weren't intelligent, even simple creatures could understand when they've met their match. "Are you guys alright?" Han shouted down to everyone on the island. There was a silence before he heard Celine yell back, "What made you think that was a good idea, you idiot?" Han sighed, thinking that it was good that everyone was okay. A part of him did admit that he may have overdid the power of the lightning. "The princess says that we'll be proceeding from here," Celine yelled at him. Considering that they would be traveling at night, he thought it might be good if they had some light. "A necklace. When you go down, make sure you give this to Celine to pass around." He gave her a bag filled with mini mana crystals that would display like a flashlight. For Celestra, he made it so that she would be able to see in the dark. If he knew anything about wildlife, they would be attracted to any light. This was one of the reasons why fish, like the anglerfish, was so good at being a predator. Fish would become attracted to light and be eaten by it. Han didn't stress about using them as bait because he knew that they would be able to handle themselves. In the dark and through the fog, they made their slow progress.